interactive. I hope that this has given you some food for thought and a sense of what this new policy environment looks like. But I'd be interested in comments or questions either on the underlying proposition that driving improved business environments at state level is the best way to achieve change, I think is broadly speaking the consensus view in the panel. And secondly, about the implications for investors and how they should operate, and if at all, in a different way in this new world, insofar as it is new, than in the old.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the wonderful discussion. I have a simple question. I mean, comparative federalism at a micro level, and macro level, is different. At a macro level, with India having a incremental capital output ratio of around 6 and a growth GDP rate of 6% per annum, would mean that you would require FDI at a macro level of around 36% each year to sustain a growth of 6%. Now, at the macro level, therefore, if you're having FDI totally at, say, growing at 48%, that's the number which was quoted in one of the sessions earlier today, then what it means is that India will be having deflationary pressures, and that's exactly what the RBI indicated last week. India is close to deflation. Now, with the dispersion of FDI across states, so the sum of the parts is actually less than the whole, because you'll be having deflationary effects across the economy. So that's a danger if I can see clearly if this panel agrees. And the second point is at a micro level, is it another name for the much hated term divide and rule? Does this panel agree on that?
Well, thank you. We might just start off with the first question, which I feel was rather beyond my economic competence. And I'm looking for a volunteer.
First of all, the vast impact of competitive federalism is not on FDI. It is on domestic investment, domestic jobs, etc., right, of which FDI is one part. So competitive federalism, I don't think, is put in place just to attract FDI. It is to have investment and to improve the quality of life in different parts of the country, etc. So it's not, it wouldn't be fair to say that that is just an FDI policy. That's the first thing. Second thing is, look, it's a little bit like saying, gee, I'm now running, when I go running, I can run a mile in about 20 minutes, which is pretty bad, right? And then the question is, gee, when you get to 5 minutes, it's going to be really tough for you. Have you thought about that? My answer is, listen, let me just get from 20 to 15 to 10 minutes, right? So let's get some FDI, and if we get too much FDI, we'll worry about it at that stage. Right now, our problem is not that. Our problem is we're not getting enough in domestic investment, and for the size of economy and the size of potential, we're not getting sufficient FDI. When we get, there are many factors that can adjust for too much FDI, to be honest. At some, you
That's
can
exactly
adjust
my point. You have a savings rate of 30%. Do you need that
the
much
savings
of FDI?
rate might go up. The savings rate might go up. We might get more money from, not from FDI, but from FIIs. We might get more money from the diaspora that's out there. There are many different factors that adjust as we go along. So hopefully we'll adjust on that. I'm less worried about that than saying, let's get competitive federalism and let's get a lot of investment, and then we'll worry about where it gets us.
Yeah, no, I think that does sound a sensible answer. There's a question, I think, here in the middle.
Thank you very much, everyone. If you look at the way the panel's seated today, it's very interesting, and the question is pointed to that as well. If you move from one end of the panel to the other, there is an inside-out approach and an outside-in approach towards India and everything that's happening here. Are there differences of opinion in terms of the ease of doing business and what your expectations are as you move from one end of the panel to the other?
Shall we start off with Naina as a sort of
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think if I have to answer this, you heard Patricia really believe in it. So clearly what you're hearing there is the ease of doing business, and when you get the indices flushed out in a more transparent manner with the World Bank study, as has been referred to, we do get to a position of better investment environment, and I think that was endorsed. From Jerry, he didn't say it wasn't going to work, but his worry is that there'd be too many separate laws in different states. And I think, Jerry, the answer to that is most areas have concurrent status. So it's there because as states move, and hopefully that concurrent status is not used by the center to get in the way. And if the center endorses what one state does, there's a strong chance other states follow because of the nature of concurrent law and therefore the nature of engagement at the center. And certainly areas like safety and health, as you mentioned, safety is buried in the law of the country. It's not left to different states. And I do think there are many areas such as that which can't be easily fiddled around with unless the center moves there. So I don't think the complexity goes up, which, it's a good point you raise. I think the complexity has always been there because we have multiple states with multiple state laws and state laws that indeed work with the concurrent status with the center. But I think what does change is that everyone or most states will be marching to the same tune because the desire to grow of the development message, and that was demonstrated through the last election, which actually I think for the first time in the history of the country was actually fought much more on issues of economic growth and development than on caste and religion, and it was far less divisive than previous elections have been. And if that indeed is directionally where the country is going, then what we get is a much more congruence of action towards economic growth, and therefore, I think, a center which endorses states that move ahead and states which follow each other and compete with each other. But one word of caution, you don't just look at the one that comes to you with a nice red ribbon and all your approvals in the box. You are stuck as a state with some of the baggage of the past, some of which will reflect in the World Bank study because, hey, it's not like they've started this study in the last 12 months. So it's going to be buried in history, which is a bit unfortunate for the states that are moving ahead, a la Bengal. But the other is infrastructure. If you look at one of the most serious impediments to make in India, it is infrastructure. And infrastructure is not going to turn overnight. So are you going to be the one that's going to be betting on going in the state which gives you all your approvals with the nice red ribbon? Or are you going to have to first plow away building all those roads and getting port connectivity and all that stuff done before you can attract it? So I think some of it is going to be played out as the baggage of history. But yes, moving forward, hopefully, to enable those states to attract more.
Jerry.
But also, business is not easy. I mean, successful companies wouldn't do much better than poorer companies if business was easy. Business is competitive. If you'd phrase your question a different way, is India a good place to build a successful business? I'd say without reservation that India is one of the best countries in the world to build a successful business, in a sense, and I think that's a more interesting question than whether it's easy or not. Yeah. In some ways, from my perspective, it's been great that we built such a successful business in such a difficult country, because the value of that business is even greater because we have built a successful business in a difficult country. But when a country has complications, and all countries are complicated in different ways, of course the key thing is to identify those parameters at the beginning of your journey which are most likely to make your business journey successful. And the fact is the parameters are different in India. We're now hearing that the parameters may become different state by state. It still doesn't take away the need to identify those parameters, but I would not like us to leave this room this evening thinking that India is a difficult place to build a successful business, because I really do not believe that. Our experience has shown that, and I think the experience of other major international investors also shows that.
I just want to add one thing to your comment from a different angle, right? Which is, we are always talking about the ease of doing business, etc. in both the Make in India as well as in the service businesses, one of the huge problems we have is shortage of well-trained people. Despite the fact that we have a population of 1.25 billion, every study talks about we don't have people at different levels, right? So if you think about it from states that will have a better education system, which is a state subject, it's not a central subject, they will have a competitive advantage not for next year or the year after, but over the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And so when you think about competitive federalism, we shouldn't just think about, we're doing, all of this is to improve the business climate alone. It is to improve the lives of the people out there. And so the investments in social infrastructure, like education, like healthcare, I think we want competition in that, because that will make a fundamental difference over the long term to improve the business climate, in addition to all the things about, I have land and I can give you approvals, etc. For service industries where India has an advantage in certain aspects like IT, BPO, etc., states that have great colleges and great education are the ones that are getting many of these, these big companies coming there and putting in campuses of 30 and 50,000 people. So we shouldn't limit competitive federalism only to the sphere of near-term business. It should have an impact on social development and the fundamental quality of lives of people.
Yes, I think it's a very interesting point about the length of time before you judge success or failure in this whole project, and what is the benchmark you set. And I do think that Agner's absolutely right that it's a sort of pretty uneven playing field at the moment. I mean, if you are the Chief Minister of West Bengal, you have to live with the fact that a previous regime for a long period abolished the teaching of English in the schools as a matter of political principle. Well, you've therefore got a much less well-suited workforce for the world. Sorry, Vipin, my apologies.
Yeah, I just want to red flag one thing on competitive federalism, and that is that, and I take an analogy from what Adil said about running a mile in 20, 15, 10, and 5 minutes. There are states that are already running, let's say, at a mile at 10 minutes, and there are states that are running at 20 minutes. The question is, if some states don't jump on to the competitive federalism, but still have a population of 100 million people, what does the government do? Because it's not that in a class, or in a business, you can go bankrupt, but in a country like this, you've got to make sure that even those that are laggards, there is some basis for negotiation on outcomes and funds that will be given. So competitive federalism will not be a panacea, but will certainly be an engine. But we've got to watch out for the states that are unable to move as fast as required.
An experience in the US would show that, wouldn't it? Because a failed state within a federal structure is a very difficult thing to deal with. A failed city within a state is a very, very difficult thing to deal with. So I think as long as there is some underlying quality control on all of this, this works.
But let's not forget as well that Indian voters have shown themselves remarkably good at re-electing state governments that are delivering for them and getting rid of the ones that aren't delivering for them. So there's also an element of quality control from below, as well as the potential for some quality control from the centre.